Officer Dean had served on the police force for almost 15 years. Many people in town saw him as a strong and confident officer who always followed the rules, but few knew what kind of man he truly was when no one was watching. He liked power, and he liked when people feared him. Over the years, small complaints had been made about his unfair behavior, but nothing serious was ever proven. His calm smile in public made him look trustworthy, and that was enough for his seniors to ignore the quiet whispers around him. One afternoon, a robbery took place in a small grocery store at the edge of town. The shop owner was shaken, some cash was missing, and people were scared. Dean arrived on the scene quickly, notebook in hand, acting as if he already knew everything. The truth was, he did not have any real leads, but his eyes moved across the small crowd until they stopped at a young man standing near a parked car. His name was Marcus, a local mechanic who often came to buy snacks after work. He wore oil-stained clothes and had tired eyes from long hours in his garage. He had nothing to do with what had happened, yet Dean's mind quickly made a decision. To him, Marcus looked like an easy suspect. Dean asked a few questions, wrote down Marcus's name, and left with a strange smile. He spent that evening filling out his report, adding small details that had never happened. He wrote that a witness claimed to have seen Marcus leaving the store minutes before the alarm rang. He added that Marcus's fingerprints were found on a piece of glass near the counter, though no such evidence existed. Dean even made a quiet visit to the store later that night, touching a few items and pretending to collect samples, while secretly leaving behind something that could later be used to frame Marcus. Marcus had no idea what was happening. He finished repairing an old pickup truck that night and cleaned his hands with a rag before locking the garage. His mother, who lived with him in a small house on Oak Street, had already cooked dinner and was waiting. She always told him she was proud of how hard he worked, saving every dollar to keep their small home safe. They had lost his father years ago, so Marcus had learned to be the man of the house early in life. That night he was simply tired, thinking about how many cars he needed to fix the next day. The next morning, while Marcus was changing the brake pads on a customer's car, 2 police cars pulled up in front of his shop. He wiped his hands and stepped outside, surprised to see Officer Dean walking toward him. Dean asked if Marcus knew anything about the robbery the night before. Marcus shook his head and said he had been at work all evening. But Dean's tone was already set, and it sounded more like an accusation than a question. Within minutes, Dean said he had enough reason to take Marcus in for questioning. The people in nearby stores watched as Marcus was handcuffed and guided toward the car. Confusion filled his mind. He kept saying there must be some mistake, that he was innocent. Dean simply told him to cooperate, speaking in a calm but cold voice. At the police station, Marcus sat in a small room under a flickering light. He was nervous but kept believing the truth would come out soon. He told them he had been at his shop all evening and his co-workers could confirm it. But no one seemed interested in hearing that. Dean walked in with a file pretending to have strong proof. He said Marcus's fingerprints matched the ones found at the store and that a witness had identified him. Marcus was speechless. He had never even been near that store at the time of the robbery. The idea that someone could twist things like this felt impossible to him. Back home, Marcus's mother got the call that her son had been taken in for questioning. She dropped everything and rushed to the station. When she arrived, she tried to talk to anyone who would listen. She begged them to check the security camera from the shop and from her son's garage. But the officers told her the camera footage was unclear and wouldn't help. She cried, telling them Marcus was a good boy who never hurt anyone. Still, no one paid much attention. Dean stood at the end of the hallway, pretending to be busy while hiding a small smile. He believed his plan was working perfectly. The next day, news spread through town that Marcus had been arrested as a suspect. People who once greeted him politely now looked away. Some even whispered that they had always suspected something was off about him. The small-town gossip moved faster than any truth could. Marcus sat behind a cold metal table, wondering how quickly his world had turned upside down. He thought of his mother, who must be crying at home. He thought of his customers who trusted him with their cars. Everything he had built over years of hard work was collapsing overnight. Dean, on the other hand, walked around the precinct as if nothing had happened. He told his fellow officers he had solved the case, acting like a hero. He even spoke to a local reporter, giving short answers that made him sound dedicated and brave. He did not know that someone was listening carefully, a young reporter named Lisa, who had been covering local stories for a few months. She noticed that Dean's statements about the case didn't make much sense. The timing of the robbery and the arrest seemed too quick, and the evidence sounded oddly perfect. Lisa had seen cases before where things didn't add up, and something in her gut told her that this story was not as simple as it looked. Meanwhile, Marcus spent another night in a small holding cell, replaying every moment in his head. He kept asking himself what went wrong and why someone would want to do this to him. His mother managed to visit him once. She held his hands through the bars and told him to stay strong. She promised she would find a lawyer and that the truth would come out. Her voice trembled, but her eyes showed faith. Marcus nodded, trying to believe it too, though deep down he was scared. He had never been in trouble before, and now he was facing something he didn't understand. Dean filed his final report the next morning. He made sure all the fake details were neatly written. He submitted it with confidence, knowing it would pass without question. His supervisor, who trusted him blindly, praised his quick work. Dean felt proud for a moment, unaware that he had just started a chain of events that would soon destroy his career. He didn't know that his lies would be exposed in a way he never imagined. Lisa spent the next few days reviewing her notes and looking for any official updates. She noticed that there was no real witness listed in any public document, even though Dean mentioned one in his report. She also learned that the store's security footage had been marked as unavailable, which seemed strange for a robbery case. Something inside her told her to dig deeper. She didn't know Marcus yet, but she felt his story calling out from between the lines of Dean's report. Marcus, sitting alone in his cell, prayed quietly. He didn't ask for miracles, only for truth to find its way to light. He thought about his mother and how she always said that good hearts are tested the hardest. Somewhere deep inside, he found a small spark of hope. He didn't know it yet, but help was already on its way, from a stranger who refused to let lies win. That night, the wind blew through the quiet streets outside the station. The same small grocery store that started it all was already open again, customers walking in and out as if nothing had happened. But beneath that calm surface, a story of injustice had begun, and the man who caused it had no idea what was waiting for him. The night after Marcus was taken to jail, the small town felt unusually quiet. His mother sat on the porch of their little house, staring at the empty chair where Marcus usually sat after work. The ticking of the old wall clock inside sounded louder than ever. Every second felt heavy. She had spent the day calling lawyers, visiting the police station, and trying to talk to anyone who would listen. Some people were kind, but most just said the same thing, that the law had to take its course. She felt helpless but refused to give up. Meanwhile, Officer Dean slept soundly in his apartment. He believed everything was done perfectly. In his mind, the case was already closed. The next morning, he stood proudly in front of his locker, hearing other officers talk about how quickly he solved the robbery. He smiled quietly and nodded, enjoying the small moment of praise. He didn't think anyone would ever look deeper into what he had done. But not far away, at a small newspaper office downtown, a young reporter named Lisa sat behind her desk, reading the morning paper. The front page showed a photo of Marcus being led away by police officers, his head lowered, his face full of confusion. The article said the case was solved within 24 hours. That was what made Lisa stop reading and look again. Something didn't sit right with her. Cases like this usually took weeks, sometimes months, to confirm evidence and witnesses. Yet this one had moved too quickly, and everything sounded too clean, too neat, almost like a story made to look perfect. Lisa had been working as a journalist for 3 years. She was young but sharp, known for noticing things others missed. She had covered small-town events before, school fundraisers, community fairs, and missing pet stories. But she also had a deep sense of fairness and didn't like when someone's life was ruined without real proof. She had seen enough to know that mistakes happened, and sometimes people in power didn't want those mistakes to be found. That morning, Lisa decided to visit Marcus's garage. It was locked, but the mechanic next door was sweeping the sidewalk. When she introduced herself and mentioned Marcus, the man stopped and sighed. He said Marcus had been working on cars all evening the day the robbery happened. He had seen Marcus through the window, heard the sound of tools, and even waved at him before closing his own shop. Lisa wrote everything down carefully. She thanked him and left, her curiosity turning into determination. Later that day, she went to the grocery store where the robbery had happened. The owner, an older man named Harold, seemed nervous when she introduced herself as a reporter. He said he didn't want any trouble, and that the police had already handled everything. But when Lisa asked if he had seen Marcus that night, the man shook his head slowly. He said he didn't really see who did it. He had only reported what was missing. That made Lisa pause. If the owner didn't see Marcus and no one else was around, then who was this mysterious witness that Officer Dean mentioned in his report? She thanked Harold and stepped outside, standing in the afternoon sunlight thinking deeply. She could feel the story opening up like a locked door. She went back to her office and opened her laptop. She searched through public police reports online. Dean's statement said that a local man named T. Miller had identified Marcus as the suspect. Lisa searched every local directory and voter record in town. There was no one named T. Miller who matched the witness details. Her eyebrows furrowed. It was starting to look strange. Meanwhile, Marcus sat quietly in the small visiting room at the jail, his hands folded in front of him. His mother came to see him again. She brought him a small paper bag with food, though the guards only allowed certain items inside. She told him not to lose hope and mentioned that someone from the local paper had asked around about his case. Marcus was surprised. He didn't know any reporters, but the thought that someone cared enough to ask made him feel a small light in his heart. Lisa, that same evening, drove across town to the courthouse records office. It was late, but the clerk on duty knew her and allowed her to look at copies of the case file. She sat at a small wooden table under a yellow lamp, reading line after line. Dean's report said the fingerprints found at the scene matched Marcus's. But when she checked the evidence list, she noticed that the collection time of the fingerprints was recorded several hours after Marcus had already been taken into custody. That made no sense. How could evidence appear after the suspect was arrested? She made notes, took photos of the documents, and thanked the clerk before leaving. The night air was cool and quiet, but Lisa's mind was full of questions. As she drove home, she thought about Marcus's mother. She imagined how it must feel to see her son accused of something he didn't do. She promised herself that she wouldn't stop until she found out what was really going on. The next morning, Lisa called the police department asking for a comment from Officer Dean. The person on the phone told her he wasn't available, but she could leave a message. She did. She simply said she was working on an article and needed to confirm some details about the robbery case. Later that afternoon, Dean called her back. His voice sounded polite, even friendly, but something about the way he answered made Lisa uneasy. He said the department was confident in their evidence and that the case was straightforward. When she asked if she could speak to the witness, he said that person's identity had to remain confidential for safety reasons. That made Lisa's suspicion grow even stronger. After the call, Lisa decided to talk to Marcus's lawyer. His name was Anthony Green, a local attorney who sometimes took small cases for free if he believed someone was being treated unfairly. He agreed to meet her at his office. When Lisa showed him what she found, the missing witness record, the mismatched evidence times, he looked serious. He told her he had already noticed some irregularities but hadn't been able to get the court to listen yet. Lisa's notes gave him something more concrete. Anthony decided to file a request to review the evidence again. He also asked for the footage from Marcus's garage camera, which Marcus's mother had been trying to share but was told was unnecessary. When they finally viewed it, the video clearly showed Marcus working at his garage during the time of the robbery. The timestamp on the video matched perfectly. Lisa smiled when she saw it. For the first time, the truth had something solid to stand on. She wrote an early draft of her story that night but didn't publish it yet. She wanted more proof. She knew that if she went public too early, the police could deny everything and cover it up. Instead, she kept collecting details quietly. She spoke with 2 other officers who had worked under Dean before. They didn't say much, but one of them quietly mentioned that Dean had handled evidence alone several times in past cases, something that was against standard procedure. That was enough to make her realize this wasn't a simple mistake. It was a pattern. Back at the jail, Marcus felt time moving slowly. Every day felt longer than the one before. He prayed silently and tried to keep faith. When Anthony came to visit and told him that new evidence was coming to light, Marcus almost couldn't believe it. He smiled for the first time in days. He said thank you over and over again, grateful that someone cared enough to look deeper. Lisa drove home late that night with her notes stacked on the passenger seat. She looked out at the quiet streets, thinking about how strange it was that truth often hid in plain sight, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. She didn't know what would happen next, but she knew one thing for sure. She wasn't going to stop until Marcus's name was cleared and the truth came out for everyone to see. And as she parked outside her small apartment, she had no idea that what she was about to find next would not only change Marcus's life, but would shake the entire town and end Officer Dean's perfect record forever. Lisa woke up early the next morning, her mind still filled with questions. She had hardly slept the night before, thinking about the files and recordings she had reviewed. The evidence against Marcus looked weaker with every detail she uncovered. It was as if every new piece she found led her closer to something big, something hidden behind layers of lies. She made herself a cup of coffee and opened her laptop. The sound of typing filled her small apartment as she started organizing her notes. She knew that if she wanted people to listen, everything had to be clear and accurate. At the same time, lawyer Anthony Green sat in his office surrounded by papers. He had been a lawyer for over 10 years and had seen many strange cases, but this one felt different. There was a quiet sadness in Marcus's eyes that reminded him of other people who had been treated unfairly. He believed in truth, and now, with Lisa's help, he finally had something strong to work with. He called Lisa that morning and told her they needed to meet. She arrived with her bag full of documents and a determined look on her face. Anthony spread everything across his desk: Dean's report, the false witness name, the fingerprint collection time, and the garage video showing Marcus working. Lisa also showed him another small but important finding: a copy of the digital evidence record that showed one photo had been edited. The date stamp on that image didn't match the original file's creation time. It looked like someone had changed the time to fit their story. Anthony leaned back in his chair, thinking deeply. This, he said quietly, could be the turning point. That afternoon, Anthony went to the courthouse and filed a motion to review the evidence. He explained that there were serious doubts about the police report and requested permission to present new proof. The clerk looked surprised but accepted the documents. Lisa stood outside the courthouse waiting. When Anthony stepped out, he nodded with a small smile. It was just the beginning, but it was progress. Meanwhile, inside the police station, Officer Dean was unaware of what was happening. He carried on with his usual work, giving small talks to his team about being efficient and careful. In his mind, he had already moved past Marcus's case. He believed it was over. He didn't know that others were quietly gathering everything that would soon expose what he had done. Lisa spent the next few days collecting statements from people around town. Some were scared to talk, but others quietly admitted they never believed Marcus was guilty. One woman who lived near the grocery store said she saw a different man running away that night. Someone taller, wearing a jacket that didn't match Marcus's clothes. Lisa wrote down every detail. The woman didn't want her name shared yet, but her words added another piece to the puzzle. When Lisa returned to the office, her editor noticed her long hours and asked why she was so focused on this case. She simply said, "Because someone's life depends on it." The editor nodded and told her to keep going, but to be careful. Lisa understood what that meant. Stories like this could bring pressure from powerful people, but she didn't care. She was doing what was right. In the small jail cell, Marcus waited every day for news. His mother visited whenever she could, always bringing a warm smile even when her eyes showed exhaustion. One morning she told him that Lisa and Anthony were working together now, and that something good was happening. Marcus felt a small wave of relief. He said he didn't know why they cared so much, but his mother reminded him that there were still good people in the world, people who couldn't sleep when they saw unfairness. A week later, the court agreed to hold a hearing to review the evidence. It wasn't a full trial yet, but it was the first step toward reopening the case. Lisa sat beside Anthony in the small courtroom, her notebook open, heart beating fast. Dean entered the room with a confident walk, his badge shining under the lights. He looked at Marcus for a brief moment, but quickly turned away. To him, this hearing was just a formality. He believed the judge would side with him, like always. Anthony began by calmly explaining the inconsistencies. He showed how the fingerprint collection time didn't align with the arrest timeline. Then he presented the garage video showing Marcus at work during the robbery. The judge leaned forward, watching carefully as the footage played on the screen. Marcus could be seen fixing a car, his shirt dirty with oil, the clock behind him clearly visible. Dean shifted slightly in his seat, still trying to keep his face neutral. But Lisa noticed a small flicker of worry in his eyes. Then came the digital evidence. Anthony explained that one of the photos in the case had been modified. The judge raised an eyebrow and asked how that could happen. Dean started to speak, saying it must have been a simple technical error. But Anthony's tone remained calm as he replied that the same officer, Dean, had personally handled that file. The room grew silent. Lisa took notes as the judge asked for copies of the files. She looked around the courtroom, at Marcus sitting quietly beside his lawyer, at his mother holding her hands together in silent prayer, and at Dean staring straight ahead. It was a strange moment where truth and lies were sitting in the same room, waiting to be weighed. After the session ended, the judge said he needed time to review everything. Marcus was taken back to his cell, but this time with a lighter heart. When Lisa and Anthony met him afterward, they told him that the case was finally being taken seriously. Marcus thanked them again, his voice soft but steady. He said he had been praying for a chance like this, not just to prove himself innocent, but to restore his mother's peace. That night, Lisa couldn't stop thinking about the look on Dean's face. There was something behind his calm expression, a hint of fear that told her he knew the walls were starting to close in. She went home and started writing her article. She didn't publish it yet, but she wrote every detail: how a false report could ruin an honest man's life, how truth often struggled to be heard, and how one small act of courage could begin to change everything. Over the next few days, rumors began to spread around town. People were talking again, but this time in a different tone. Some said maybe Marcus wasn't guilty after all. Others wondered if Officer Dean had gone too far. The same neighbors who once avoided Marcus's mother now greeted her softly, offering words of support. The town that once turned away was starting to open its eyes. Dean, however, began to feel the pressure. His supervisor called him in for a private talk, asking why reporters were suddenly interested in the case. Dean brushed it off, saying it was nothing serious. But when he left the room, his hands felt cold. He didn't like that people were asking questions. He told himself he had done what he needed to do, that no one would find real proof. But inside, a quiet worry began to grow. Lisa met with Anthony again to plan their next step. They agreed to request access to Dean's patrol car logs and body camera files. If the timestamp showed he was near the grocery store at the wrong time, it would be enough to prove everything. Anthony smiled slightly and said, "We're close now." "The truth always finds a way," Lisa nodded, knowing that the next part of the journey would decide everything. That night, as the town lights dimmed and the streets emptied, 3 people lay awake: Marcus hoping for freedom, Lisa preparing for the fight ahead, and Dean wondering if the truth he had buried so carefully was about to rise against him. None of them knew that the next hearing would change all of their lives forever. The courtroom was quiet that morning. Sunlight streamed through the high windows and fell across the wooden benches. People whispered softly as they waited for the hearing to begin. The story had spread around town, and now almost everyone wanted to see what would happen next. Marcus sat beside his lawyer, Anthony, wearing a plain shirt and keeping his hands folded. He tried to stay calm, though his heart beat fast. It had been weeks since his name was first mentioned in the newspapers, and now everything was coming down to this day. Lisa sat behind the defense table, her notebook open, pen ready. She wasn't there as a witness, but as a reporter who had followed every part of this journey. She looked around the room and noticed how different the atmosphere felt now. The same people who once believed Marcus was guilty now seemed unsure. Some nodded to his mother as she entered and took a seat near the front, her eyes filled with quiet hope. When Officer Dean walked in, the whispers grew louder. He wore his uniform polished and neat and carried himself with the same confidence he always did. He nodded at a few colleagues in the back row, as if reminding himself that he still had support. But his expression changed slightly when he saw Lisa and Anthony sitting together, calm and focused. For the first time, a small shadow of doubt passed through his eyes. The judge entered and everyone stood. When the session began, Anthony rose to speak. He started by thanking the court for allowing the evidence review. Then he spoke in a clear, steady voice, saying that this was not just about one man's name, but about truth itself. He explained how small mistakes could destroy lives and how honesty was the foundation of justice. The judge listened closely, his hands folded on the desk. Anthony began by presenting the new evidence, The garage video. The lights dimmed slightly as the video played on the screen. It showed Marcus in his work uniform, repairing a car, moving between tools and talking to a customer who had stopped by. The timestamp in the corner matched the exact time of the robbery. There was no doubt. Marcus couldn't have been at the grocery store when it happened. The courtroom remained silent. Even the sound of the old air conditioner could be heard in the stillness. Dean shifted in his seat, keeping his face straight but his hands tightened slightly on the table. The judge asked the prosecution if they had any comments about the footage. The prosecutor hesitated and said they would need to verify the file's authenticity. Anthony immediately explained that it had already been verified by an independent expert. The judge nodded and told them to continue. Then came the second piece of evidence, the fingerprint record. Anthony explained that the fingerprints said to belong to Marcus had been collected several hours after he was already in custody. He showed the official time logs, each marked with exact minutes. The judge's expression changed. He leaned forward, asking who was responsible for collecting and recording that evidence. The answer came from the report itself, Officer Dean. For the first time, Dean's calm mask began to crack. He spoke, saying it must have been a simple mistake or a clerical error. But when Anthony presented the digital log showing that Dean had personally entered the data that night, his explanation sounded weaker. Lisa watched him closely, writing down every small reaction, the tightening jaw, the nervous glance toward the prosecutor, the way his voice lost its firmness each time Anthony showed another detail. Then came the photo evidence. Anthony displayed the image on the courtroom screen. It showed what Dean had claimed was proof of Marcus leaving the store. But Lisa had traced the file's digital history, and the expert confirmed that the timestamp had been changed. The judge looked at the two versions of the same image, one with the original time, one after it was edited. The difference was clear. The courtroom grew heavy with silence again. Marcus's mother held her hands together, tears quietly forming in her eyes. She didn't speak, but her lips moved as if in prayer. Lisa looked at her and felt her own throat tighten. She could feel the weight of every hour this family had suffered, and now, at last, the truth was stepping forward. Dean tried to defend himself. He said he had only done what he thought was right. He said he believed Marcus was the suspect based on information he had received. But when the judge asked who the witness T. Miller was, Dean hesitated. He couldn't answer. Anthony waited patiently, letting the silence fill the room. The judge repeated the question, and Dean said he didn't remember. That single answer changed everything. The prosecutor looked uncomfortable. It was clear that the so-called witness had never existed. Dean had written a name that meant nothing, used a story that didn't exist, and built a case on things that were never real. The judge looked disappointed rather than angry. He said in a calm voice that the court would not tolerate false reporting or misuse of authority. He ordered a full internal investigation into the case. Marcus felt his chest loosen as if a heavy chain had been lifted from him. He turned to look at his mother, who was quietly crying but smiling through her tears. Lisa watched him and wrote the words "Truth Finally Seen" at the top of her notebook. The courtroom was no longer filled with doubt. It was filled with the quiet sound of justice finding its way. The judge declared that all charges against Marcus would be dropped pending the final report of the investigation. People in the room began to whisper again, but this time it was different. Some clapped softly, others nodded. Marcus closed his eyes and took a deep breath. For the first time in weeks, he felt free, even though he was still sitting in the same seat. His name, once spoken with suspicion, now carried a new meaning, one tied to truth and strength. After the hearing ended, Marcus stood and shook Anthony's hand with deep gratitude. He thanked Lisa too, his voice low but full of emotion. She smiled and said that he didn't owe her thanks. The truth had always been his, they had just helped uncover it. His mother came forward and hugged him tightly, whispering that she had never lost faith in him. Outside the courthouse, people gathered in small groups, talking about what had happened. Some were surprised, others ashamed that they had believed the first story so quickly. Lisa walked past them quietly, her recorder still in her hand. She could already imagine the headline. Not about crime or fear, but about truth and the power of standing up when things don't feel right. Dean left the courtroom later, his steps slower than before. The confidence he once carried was gone. His colleagues avoided his eyes. The investigation would now focus on him, and for the first time, he realized that his badge could not hide the truth forever. Lisa watched him walk down the courthouse steps, then turned to look back at Marcus and his mother standing together in the sunlight. The day felt calm and warm, as if the air itself had changed. Justice didn't always come quickly, she thought, but it always arrived when people refused to give up. Marcus stood outside for a long time, watching the sky. He didn't say much, but his silence said everything. He had faced something no one should ever face, yet he stood there strong, gentle, and free. His mother held his hand tightly, and they both knew life would never be the same again. Lisa drove home that evening feeling both tired and peaceful. She thought about how truth sometimes hides behind the smallest details: a timestamp, a missing name, a simple act of courage. She opened her laptop one last time that night and began typing her article. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard as she wrote about faith, honesty, and the quiet bravery of one young man who never stopped believing that right would win in the end. And far away, in the quiet of his office, Dean sat staring at his badge on the table. For years he had believed that power gave him control over others. Now he realized that real strength came from honesty, something he had traded for pride. He didn't know what his future would be, but one thing was certain. The truth he tried to bury had finally risen, and nothing could hide it again. A few weeks had passed since the courtroom hearing that changed everything. The small town that once whispered about Marcus now spoke his name with respect. His story had spread beyond the town, carried by newspapers, radio stations, and online stories that Lisa helped publish. People who had never met him wrote messages of support, saying how proud they were of his courage and patience. Marcus had become a quiet symbol of truth and strength, though he never asked for it. He returned home to his small house on Oak Street. His mother waited for him at the front door with open arms. She held him tightly for a long time, tears shining in her eyes. For the first time in many months, their house felt alive again. The smell of home-cooked food filled the kitchen, and laughter returned to their evenings. Neighbors came by to visit, bringing flowers, small gifts, and warm words. Even those who once believed the lies came to apologize. Marcus accepted every apology with calm kindness. He said that what mattered most was that people had finally seen the truth. One morning, Marcus went back to his garage. The tools were still there, the same smell of oil and metal in the air, but something felt different. The place that had once been his workplace now felt like a symbol of his innocence. He walked around slowly, touching the cars, remembering the long nights he had spent fixing engines while worrying about bills, not knowing that one day this same garage would save him. He smiled to himself and whispered a quiet thank you. Lisa visited him that afternoon. She parked her small car outside and waved as Marcus came out, wiping his hands on a rag. She handed him a newspaper with his photo on the front page. The headline read, "Truth Wins. Local Man Cleared After False Charges." He smiled shyly when he saw it. He said he didn't like attention, but Lisa told him that his story was giving hope to others who had been treated unfairly. She said people needed to see that honesty could still win, even when it felt impossible. They sat on the porch with his mother, drinking tea while the soft wind moved through the trees. Lisa asked if he ever felt angry at what had happened. Marcus shook his head. He said that anger would only make him carry more pain. He wanted to live freely now, without bitterness. His mother smiled proudly, saying that his heart was stronger than any courtroom. Meanwhile, Officer Dean's life had changed completely. The internal investigation found that he had falsified evidence and lied in his reports. He was dismissed from the police department, and a public apology was made to Marcus and his family. Dean moved out of town quietly, avoiding attention. He had lost his job, his reputation, and the respect of his colleagues. For the first time, he understood what it meant to face the truth he once ignored. It was not easy for him, but it was fair. The department also announced new rules to make sure no one could manipulate evidence again. Lisa later wrote a follow-up article about these reforms, calling it "A Town's Lesson in Truth." Marcus decided he didn't want to be known only as the man who was falsely accused. He wanted to turn his experience into something good. With help from Lisa and Anthony, he started a small community project for people who had faced unfair treatment. They called it the Second Chance Foundation. It wasn't big at first, just a few volunteers, a small office, and a lot of heart. They helped people find lawyers, told their stories, and made sure no one felt alone. Marcus often spoke at local schools, telling young people about honesty, hard work, and believing in themselves. His words always touched people deeply because they came from someone who had lived through pain and found peace without hate. Lisa continued visiting often, not as a reporter now, but as a friend. She said his story reminded her why she became a journalist, not for fame or headlines, but to help truth reach people who needed to hear it. She also started working on a book about the case, not to make anyone look bad, but to remind readers that fairness is everyone's duty. Marcus supported her fully, saying he hoped the story would inspire others to speak up when something feels wrong. The seasons began to change, and the quiet town returned to its slow rhythm. The grocery store reopened under new management, and people no longer spoke of the robbery. What they remembered instead was how a man's life had been saved by courage, honesty, and the kindness of strangers. When Marcus walked through town now, people waved and smiled. Children who once stared at him with doubt now greeted him with joy. He always greeted back, humble and warm, never letting pride take over. One evening, Marcus stood outside his garage as the sun went down. The sky was painted in shades of gold and pink, and the air smelled fresh after a light rain. His mother joined him, standing quietly beside him. She said she had always prayed that truth would protect her son, and now her prayers had been answered. Marcus nodded and said that maybe the hardest moments in life were the ones that teach us the most. She smiled, saying she hoped he would never lose that gentle heart of his. Lisa arrived soon after, holding a small envelope. Inside was a letter from the newspaper company. It said her article about Marcus had been nominated for a National Journalism Award. She laughed softly, saying she never expected that. Marcus congratulated her, saying she deserved it because she never stopped believing in him even when others turned away. She replied that she only followed what was right, and that he was the reason she found the courage to keep digging for the truth. As days turned into weeks, Marcus's foundation grew. More people came forward to share their stories, and the town began to change in quiet but meaningful ways. The local police started new training programs about fairness and accountability. Schools invited Marcus to talk about integrity. The town that once looked away from injustice was now learning from it. Lisa often said that it wasn't just Marcus who was freed. It was the whole community that found a new sense of conscience. On a calm Sunday afternoon, Marcus drove to the nearby hill overlooking the town. From there, he could see the rooftops, the school, the garage, and the courthouse. The wind brushed his face, and for the first time in a long while, he felt peace deep inside. He thought about everything that had happened. The fear, the doubt, the endless days in a cell, and the people who stood by him. He whispered softly that he forgave everything. He didn't want to carry the past anymore. He wanted to live for tomorrow. Lisa joined him a few minutes later. They stood together in silence, watching the sky turn orange. She said that sometimes life takes people through storms just to show them how strong they really are. Marcus smiled and said that maybe strength isn't about fighting. It's about staying true when the world doubts you. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the town lights began to glow in the distance. Marcus looked at them and felt something pure, a quiet kind of happiness that comes not from winning but from being free inside. He turned to Lisa and said that maybe this was what justice really meant. Not revenge, not pride, but peace. She nodded, writing those words down in her small notebook, knowing they would stay with her forever. The wind grew gentle, carrying the soft sound of life returning to normal. The story that began with lies ended with truth. The man once blamed without reason was now the man who taught everyone around him the meaning of honesty and forgiveness. And in that peaceful evening light, Marcus smiled. Not because he had proven something to the world, but because he had finally proven to himself that truth always finds its way home.